we see the world as we are, not as it is. I call the honourable member Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we've just heard from that minister that apparently she will never forget the place from which she started before becoming a member of a parliament and indeed the Minister for Social Development. Now, I've never been or felt compelled to reflect on the minister's personal experience. I've personally never thought it was necessarily appropriate to do so. But the minister herself has brought it into the context of the welfare reforms. So I feel compelled now to respond to that challenge. That minister claims that she never forgot what it felt like to be on the domestic purposes benefit and the lack of confidence that she felt during that time. She probably also never forgot what it felt like to have the support of the training incentive allowance to help her study, to become a social worker. Assistance that she has since severely reduced the ability of other people in the same position to access. She probably never forgot what it felt like to be able to study and better herself whilst being a mum on the domestic purposes benefit, something that is an opportunity that is now removed for many domestic purpose benefit recipients now because they will be transferred to a job seeker benefit and will not be allowed to study. If that minister truly, Mr Speaker, never forgot what it was like to be on the DPB, then clearly she's forgotten the emotions she's just expressed now, because those are the emotions I get every single day in the letters as spokesperson for social development for Labour. And they haven't. And if that minister wants to pretend that she is somehow, through these welfare reforms, she's improving the situation for those people, I'd like her to explain how that is, because all she's done, as far as I can see, is remove the very ladder that she walked up herself. Mr Speaker, that minister also raised benefit figures. She's tried to claim that somehow on this side of the House that we've denied people should get access to welfare when they need it most. That is entirely inaccurate. You will never hear a member of the Labour Party ever claim anything other than the social security system is there for those who need it most. For those who need it most, and when in their times of need, that is what it is there for, and we will defend it because we built it. But, Mr Speaker, I cannot sit back and allow a minister to claim that her welfare reforms have been successful because of all the people who have come off. That is a complete contradiction because, Mr Speaker, since 2008, all of the major categories have gone up. So it is a contradiction for that minister to claim success based on numbers. So, Mr Speaker, if the minister is going to stand up and tell this House that 5,000 people have come off a sickness benefit, I will point out that during that time that 7,000 people went on. Sure, absolutely. If they need to access it, they should. But it's absolutely disingenuous for that minister to try and banty around numbers as though her reforms have changed the world, when in actual fact, from the people who are experiencing it on the front line, that has done no such thing. In fact, Mr Speaker, if you ask those who are on government support right now what kind of impression they've been left with from these reforms, well, why not look at what the public probably think about when they hear the welfare reforms? Let's track back through the announcements and the way they were trickled out. Well, probably providing a bit of context about what was happening at the time. Nick Smith resigned over the ACC debacle. Within 6 days, we had the first welfare reforms announced. John Banks' Kin.com scandal broke. The Kim.com scandal broke. Campbell Live started directly implicating the Prime Minister, and within a week, the contraception announcement, part of a package, but all dribbled out. The contraception announcement was dropped.
Point of order, the honourable member.
As much, sir, as I'm reluctant to interrupt my colleague across the aisle, but this is the Social Security Benefit Categories and Work Focus Amendment Bill. It's got nothing to do with Kim.com and a whole range of other things that we discussed during the general debate. So, sir, I ask the member just to bring it back to the bill.
I call the honourable member.
As I was saying, the first tranche of welfare reforms at that time were released, and that was the contraception element. Now, people might remember that. That was that we were going to give access to beneficiaries to long-term contraceptives, which, as I understand, less than 40 people have taken up. We then in June had the resignations in ACC, the continuing Bronwyn-Puller scandal, and in that same period, Bill English then raised drug testing. Drug testing was raised again on the 21st of July. Again, for a third time, it was announced on the 28th of August, all at points of convenience for the government. And drug testing remains to be one of the most well-known aspects of this form of welfare reforms, the investment approach that the Minister talks about. And then we come to the police report that came out on John Banks, which was, again, released within a 24-hour window of the social obligations coming out. The next day, the cost of welfare generally, the actuarial valuation was then announced. Mr. Speaker, I think you get my point. Forgive me if I am cynical about this government's approach to social security, because it seems that any time anything goes badly for them, a welfare reform is handily plucked out from a bill and dropped early before the media. But, Mr. Speaker, that means that of the welfare reforms, if you ask the general public what they know of them, what will they tell you? What will they tell you? Will they tell you about this investment approach that the Minister speaks of? Will they talk about an active social security system? No, they'll be able to tell you about drug testing, warrants, being able to arrest, when a warrant of arrest is out, being able to cut a benefit. They'll probably tell you about social obligations, cutting benefits for all those beneficiaries who aren't doing right by their children. This, Mr. Speaker, apparently is the dignified system that the Minister spoke so fondly of, that wasn't going to treat people like they were victims or like they were doing something wrong. And yet every element of this welfare reform bill speaks to the idea that people who are on benefits are either criminals, drug takers, or abusing their children in some form. That is the message that these welfare reforms send. But, Mr. Speaker, what would an investment approach then look like, this mythical thing that the Minister keeps speaking of? Well, you would imagine then there might be something in the bill that would at least talk about the lack of jobs out there at the moment, or maybe even address the high cost of childcare, which we know is a barrier to work for those sole parents. Does the bill do anything on that? No. Does the bill do anything about those who are trying to get into work but don't have the right skills, training or education? No. In fact, this bill puts in a barrier by saying if you are on a job seeker category, which now will take in all those on a sickness benefit, all those from the sole parent support who have a child over a certain age, and says to them, sit on this benefit looking for a job, but don't you think about trying to train, because you must be ready and waiting for a ghost job. That is what this says. And, Mr. Speaker, I have had letters from people who have said, I wanted to better myself with a course that would mean I would be off the benefit in the longer term, and I was told by Work and Income that no, I had to sit and wait in case they called me with part-time work, part-time precarious work. The woman who raised that with me, who wanted to become trained as a nurse, was then told the next day she wasn't able to because they had a part-time cleaning job. She'd have to stay on the benefit, but she had a part-time cleaning job. Now, Mr. Speaker, is that the investment approach? Is that the active, dignified system that this Minister speaks so fondly of, when in fact this bill does the exact opposite to what that Minister has claimed? Mr. Speaker, there are 399,000 people on social security currently. They broadly fall into two categories. Those who are working actively to try and find employment. That is the vast majority of people on social security right now. And the example I used today of the graduate who has applied for 70 jobs is a real example. And yet this bill does absolutely nothing for her. And, Mr. Speaker, the second category of people are those who will, for reasons of health or disability in some form, may for a longer period of their lives require the support of our social security system. Mr. Speaker, this bill does nothing to change the reality for those two groups of people, but it does a lot to further the political gains of that national government, which has purposefully highlighted particular elements of this bill that appeal to the ugly side of New Zealand, the side that says that somehow we should have downward envy to those who are for a period in their lives using a social form of support, when it's all of our intention in this House that people have a better life outside of that system and in employment. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a major lost opportunity, but worse than that, it vilifies people who are trying to do the right thing and get into employment, and that Minister has absolutely forgotten what that feels like.
I call the Honourable Member Peseta Sam Lotu-Iiga.